Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 Tips video. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Emma Cresswell, who's an Adult Learning Development Officer responsible for ESOL at Aberdeen City Council. To write that down so I didn't forget. And Emma's going to be sharing her top tips for online learning and teaching. So over to you, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. So I'll just share the screen and then we can have a look. Okay, has that come up?
It is, yes, it's clear.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's not showing on my screen, but that's fine. So what I will say is, whilst we've got the top 10 tips, they're kind of more in chronological order from starting out when you're planning your class or planning a series of classes through to the end. So it's not necessarily this is number one, this is the best one. It's just kind of going through the lesson planning process. And yes, I work for Aberdeen City Council, but I also do online tutoring for IH World, and this is where a lot of this these ideas come from, some of the online tutoring that I've done in the past. And I think most of us, if we think back to 2020, lots of people were thrown into online teaching back then, and we didn't necessarily have the luxury of kind of going through some of these tips at that time. So this is hopefully for those of us who are still teaching online, we can step back and just think, can I make any changes? What can I implement? And I think the first thing to remember is the platform. So sometimes we get to choose what platform we're teaching with, especially if maybe we're teaching freelance, we're doing some one-to-one classes. Sometimes it's dictated by company policy, so it's whatever your school or your organization chooses. So whether you get to choose or whether it's chosen for you, there are still some things that we should remember, such as making sure you get to know the platform as well as you can in advance and keep informed of any updates. Things like Zoom are very good that it will automatically update for you and tell you what's happened in the updates. Other platforms perhaps aren't as forthcoming with some of their updates. In terms of getting to know the platform, so there's lots of YouTube tutorials that you could watch, but really hands-on is the better approach. So try things out, before your first class or even during your first classes, try things out. Maybe you've got a volunteer colleague who's happy to be a dummy student, maybe a friend or a family member, just someone who's happy to let you try things out in a safe environment, not with paying customers, shall we say. If it is a colleague, it's something that you can learn together. You can try things out and give each other feedback before then going to do it in your own classes. And if you are trying it out, what is really useful is being both a teacher and a student. So, if you're doing it with a colleague, maybe first I will be the student and my colleague will be the teacher, and then we'll swap roles, because how you see things as a host can be different to how your learners see things. So it is very important to have those dual views as you go through. And that actually leads us into the next tip, which is access. So how are you accessing the platform and how are your learners accessing the platform? Because things will look and work differently depending if you're on a smartphone, on a tablet, on a computer. Even if you're on a Chromebook, sometimes you have different access and different restrictions to a regular laptop. So it's really useful to know how your learners will be accessing the class, because it can then help you plan your lessons. If you have the option, if you've got a smartphone and a tablet, or if you've got a smartphone and a laptop, log in yourself from these different devices just to see what process your learners will go through, because this will then help you with troubleshooting. If they're like, oh, I don't know where to click, I don't know what to do, you'll have done it yourself on your phone. And it's also, you can then see what your material looks like. If you're using a PowerPoint, is the font big enough? How does it appear on the phone? Does it appear in landscape or in portrait? Things which will really help you with your lesson planning. And actually, if you can, depending on your setup, log into your class, from your work laptop if that's where you're teaching, but also have your phone, log in from your phone at the same time. Just mute everything so you don't have the background interference, but you can kind of see things in real time as you're going through the class. Also think about, if your learners are logging in from their phone, Will they be using Wi-Fi? Will they be using data? Will they have enough data to have their camera turned on, for example? Where are they logging in from? Is it a quiet environment? Are they in a cafe? Are they on the bus? Obviously, you don't necessarily want them to be doing it on the bus, but if that's any time they can do it, you have to factor these in to your lesson plans. So it might actually help, and this leads us into the next tip, to have some guidelines, maybe some ground rules, similar to setting a class contract in a physical classroom. Think about what you want the standard features of the class to be. Is it cameras on, cameras off? Like I said previously, if they're using data, can they afford to have their camera on all the time? It might also be cultural issues that some people just don't want to share their face on the screen, especially if it's mixed sex in the class. So just kind of think about, or maybe, okay, you don't have to have your camera on in the main room, but please turn it on when you go into the breakout rooms because it's easier to have a conversation. Things about muting, do you want them to stay muted at all times? Do you want them to have the cameras on, on the microphones on at all time? And this is where, you have to find out where they're logging in from. Are they in a cafe? Are they at home, but someone's cooking dinner in the background or watching EastEnders, so you're going to have the background interference? How do you want the learners to communicate in class? Do you want them to be able to send messages in the chat to each other or only to the main room and to you? Because sometimes actually as part of the lesson, part of the activity, we want them to be able to send messages to each other. It's a good way to, to peer check answers. It's just sending a quick direct message, being like, oh, for the reading, I've got 1, 3, 4, 5, whatever. But it does also open up the safeguarding risk of what are they sending to each other during the class. So think about the age of your learners, think about perhaps their maturity level, and just kind of think about what you will be doing in the class as to whether you need that feature. Or what is company policy? Some companies automatically say no DMs between participants, only between teacher and learner. So, also check what the company policy is. Because sometimes the company policy will set everything. Sometimes you as a teacher will be able to set things. And if it is down to you as a teacher, talk to your peers, because sometimes it's good if everyone has similar guidelines. So then when learners move from one class to the next, things are familiar. It's not having to learn a whole new series of rules each time they change a class. But like I said, it does very much depend on what your organization has in place if you are working for an organization. Moving on to the next tip, and here actually I've split them into two because I think when it comes to features, there's lots of things to consider. So if we start at the beginning, you're planning your course, you're planning your class, you haven't actually met your learners yet. You're just getting to know your platform. And there are so many features available with these online platforms. Some are fairly standard across all platforms. Most platforms, you have the chat box, you have camera, you might have an inbuilt whiteboard, or at least you have screen sharing so you can turn something into a whiteboard. Others will vary depending on the platform itself. And whilst you might want to throw everything at your classes from the outset to kind of, make them the best they can be, it's always good to stop and ask yourself, why am I using this feature? Does it actually add something to my class? Or am I using technology for technology's sake? Is it just like for the bells and whistles effect? So what I would say is once you've decided what will be the main features that you're going to use on a regular basis, make sure your learners are comfortable using them as well. So for example, breakout rooms. I would say most group classes, you're going to incorporate breakout rooms because it gives the learners the opportunity to speak in smaller groups, in pairs. So how do people access the breakout room? What appears on their screen? What do they have to click? How are you going to bring them back? Are they going to come back automatically? Can they come back in their own time? So think about these procedures and share them with the learners. Think about the chat box. How are they going to be typing? Because it's very different typing in the chat box on a laptop as opposed to on a phone or a tablet. Do you want them to use the emoji reactions? How do they do that? Where does it appear on their device? Figure these things out. This is why it's so important to know how your learners are accessing the platform. And then spend time in your first few classes going through things, making sure everyone's comfortable. It could be that they've been learning online for the past couple of years. It could be they've never learned online before. So you need to make sure that everyone in the class is on the same page. and repeat it. Just because you used breakout rooms last week doesn't mean they're going to remember how to use it this week. So in these first few classes, really reinforce and go over how to do this. Maybe have some little screenshots or icons on the PowerPoint or on the lesson that you're showing, so you can kind of remind them, click on this button, click here, is it the bottom of the screen or the top of the screen? And even if you can, have these like made into a little booklet so you can give it to the learner so they can refer back to it. If you sorry, I jumped ahead too quickly. If if you have a new person joining your class later in the term, do they need time to catch up? Could you buddy them up with someone in the class so that they kind of can show this new person how to do things? Give them that little booklet that you've made that shows them how to, where to click and how to click. Because it is a lot to remember, especially if English isn't your first language and, you're a low-level English learner. Maybe your phone's in a different language. So on my screen, it will say share screen. What will it say on your computer if your operating system's in a different language? So it's things like this to factor in to your lesson planning, because it will take longer the first few classes. Once everyone becomes more comfortable with it, it'll become second nature, but we do need to factor in that planning time. And then moving on to second part of features, once everyone's comfortable with the basics, then we can start thinking about introducing other features so that there's no tech overwhelm. It's gradually we're kind of introducing new things. And have recaps as well. If you haven't used something for a few classes, when you bring it back into your next class, just recap. Can you remember how to do it? Can you remember, how to access a breakout room or how to send me an emoji in the chat box? And really important, keep up to date with the updates, especially Zoom. Things can change from one update to the next. And it might be, you used to access this button through here, but now you have to go in a different way. It could be that you've updated your platform, your program, but your learners haven't. So also remind them, if it prompts you for an update, please do it, because then it makes it easier for you explaining how to access something if everyone's accessing it the same way. And now at the halfway point, timing. I think timing in any class, whether it's face-to-face or online, timing is always perhaps the thing that was the most hit and miss for some people. And when it comes to online, things can take both longer and less time. Getting in and out of breakout rooms, for example, this will depend on your internet speed, on the processing speed of whatever device you're logging in from. So if you just want them to be in the breakout room for 2-3 minutes speaking, you probably still need to give them about 5 minutes, because it will take them time to get into the breakout rooms. Then you've got the closing the breakout rooms and it's bringing people back in. So 2 minutes isn't 2 minutes. Yes, in the face-to-face classroom, you can literally pair people up, give them 2 minutes and it's done. It will take longer online, especially if it's a longer breakout room activity and you want to go in and out of all the breakout rooms to monitor. You need to factor in that time for yourself to get in and out of each room, which can take time. So if the group, for example, finishes the task, they've rushed through it, what are they going to do? Do they sit there in silence for the rest of the 3 minutes? Do you give them a follow-up task? Do you, say to them, keep going until I bring you back, even if you are repeating? So again, these are things that you need to factor into your planning and in your instructions when you're setting the task up, so they don't whiz through it and then sit there in silence for 3 minutes. Also to think about in terms of timing is, if you're sharing audio or video live in the session, depending on people's internet speed and bandwidth, it will buffer and play at different times for that person or for the people in the class. So maybe instead of sharing your screen and everyone watching it together, could you send them the link in the chat box, get them to open it on their own device, play it in their own time, and then just kind of give the thumbs up emoji once they've finished and they're back in the room? Because just it allows them to control it a little bit more, and it also means that you're kind of not reliant on your internet speed. Also, in terms of timing, is thinking time. And we all know as teachers that we need thinking time in the classroom. Language learners need time to process the instructions you're giving them and then think of their answer and then participate. And in the classroom, the physical classroom, we can read their body language, we can see their faces, we can judge, is the silence because they're thinking, or is the silence because they've zoned out and are thinking about what they're going to have for dinner? That's more difficult online, especially if they haven't got their cameras on. But even if they have got their cameras on, it's hard to read someone's face in a little black box on your screen. So that thinking time, that silence, is so much more deafening when you're online. But we do have to embrace it, especially because we're also adding in the lag, the difference between, my internet speed and their internet speed. So I might think that I've given the instructions and I've given them 30 seconds thinking time, but actually that 30 seconds thinking time is they're still hearing my instructions. So just give longer thinking time, have that little bit more silence. There's nothing worse than, did you hear me? Have you thought of an answer? Just literally sit back, try and have a smile on your face, and give them a bit of time to come up with the answers. Because they will come up with them. It's just there's always that lag. It's not as instantaneous as when we're in the face-to-face classroom. Number 4 is also thinking more about the lesson planning side of things. And this is thinking about interaction, because we still want our classes to be as interactive as possible, but there is always going to be that divide. We're always going to have that computer screen between yourself and the learners themselves. So think how you can harness the tools of the platform to make your lesson as interactive as possible, so they're not missing out on that real life language exchange. You've got breakout rooms for parent group tasks. You've got polls to ask questions. You can use emoji reactions for quick answers. Chat boxes can also be used for reactions for longer answers. But always check that everyone has access to all these features. There's nothing worse than saying, okay, everyone give me a thumbs up, and then someone hasn't got the emoji reaction, for example. So just, again, it goes back to making sure that you know how your learners are accessing the class, what devices yet they're using, and factor that into your planning. Because online learning can feel isolating, so we need to make our classrooms as inclusive and interactive as they can be to counteract the potential isolation. We also need to think about appropriacy of content and lesson planning. And I'm not talking about here about, is the topic triggering, which I think is very important, but that's just teaching in general. Here, in terms of online learning, we're thinking about how can your learners get the most out of the class? What material can be prepared in advance? For example, if there's a reading text in your class, do they need to read it during the lesson and sit there in silence for 10 minutes reading the text? Or could you flip your classroom and send the text to them for homework, give it to them end of last class, and say, okay, come to the class having read this text and understanding it. Then you can use the class time for the discussion, for the comprehension check-in, for any vocab check-in. Yes, there is always that risk that all they're going to do is put it through Google Translate. But really, what is the aim of the activity? If the aim of the activity is it's an exam prep class and they need to do timed reading, then do it in class. But still, there's nothing stopping them from Google translating it during class, even if they're in the room with you. So always just think about, what is the aim of this activity and how would my time be better spent? It will also be level and class specific. So, gauge your class and your lesson planning, but make the most of the learners being together with you as a teacher. What can they do at home and what can they spend their time in class doing? Also have a backup plan. Things do and will go wrong. Even in the face-to-face classroom, things go wrong. But I think when we're online, these problems feel so much bigger than perhaps they actually are. So what can you do? What backup plans can you have in place? What contingency plans can you have? If you know that your internet is notoriously dodgy, could you have like a backup dongle that you can log into? Could you use your mobile phone and data as a hotspot in an emergency? If your learners drop out, do they know how to get back online? Is there a plan where they can message the class WhatsApp group and just say, my internet's crashed, I'll try and get on my phone or something? what if they can't? You know, how can they contact you? Can they contact someone in the class to pass on the message? Is there a way that you can share the class material with them, so if they can't get back in, you can still email them the page from the coursebook or the PowerPoint presentation or whatever you had? And if you can establish these backup plans way back when you're doing the class guidelines, it will help the learners to feel kind of a little bit more, not comforted, but more confident that they know that something goes wrong. It's not the end of the world. They're not going to be panicking for 20 minutes trying to get back on board. And you, as a teacher, will have like that, just that reassurance that you know what you will do if something goes wrong. So things do go wrong. There's not a lot we can do about it. So we just do have to, as I put here, breathe and smile. You know, even with the best planning and intentions, we cannot control the internet gods. We cannot control the weather outside, which may, you know, take down an electricity pylon or whatever. I mean, that's a bit extreme. So don't panic. Have these contingencies in place. If it's you that's been booted off, try to get back online. If it's your learner who's been booted off, wait for them, welcome them back with a smile and continue. Because really, online learning makes learning accessible for so many more people. We just sometimes have to take the downsides with a bit of smile and focus on the positives. But yeah, so like I said, those are my top 10 tips, and hopefully you found them useful.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emma. There's something on every single one of your slides. I wish I'd done all of it 4 years ago. And now that I'm not teaching quite so often on online, it's amazing what you forget, and you're in it. And breathe and smile. I am going to write that and make it my mantra. So thank you very much for sharing all of that. That's really useful for experienced teachers, new teachers, everybody. Many thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.